There are films that come into our lives and burn a permanent image into our subconscious. They remind us of their existence in the quieter moments, in the shadows, perhaps even in a dream. Or was the film itself just that? Exploded synapses that left a charred image for us to wonder, did I really see what I thought I did? The film that perfectly encapsulates this for me is The Haunting of Julia, also known as Full Circle, because I never knew if I had actually seen it, or if it was all just the wandering imagination of a little boy who loved to watch TV. Hi everyone, my name is Dennis Callow. I'm a photographer and a filmmaker. I am not a critic, I'm not a scholar, and I'm certainly not an expert. I'm just a guy who loves talking about horror movies, and I love talking to you specifically about horror movies. And I want to thank you so much for watching, liking, subscribing after that first video dropped. So I really appreciate you guys. I appreciate that you're here. And if you haven't liked and subscribed, please do so. It really helps me possibly get monetized on YouTube. And since I'm not monetized, I did want to mention my Patreon really quick. I have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Dennis Callow. I run it with my girlfriend, Bethany Watson, who also is my filmmaking partner. Now, without further ado, let's talk about The Haunting of Julia. The history of The Haunting of Julia is an interesting one because there's not much out there about the film. I was lucky enough to come across an episode of The Projection Booth, which is an excellent podcast, which covers it greatly, and where I got a lot of my information from for the film. And I'll put a link to that episode in the description of this episode. Having come out in 1977, Julia was surrounded by classics and financial blockbusters including Star Wars: A New Hope, Saturday Night Fever, and The Spy Who Loved Me. In the horror space, we saw incredible offerings such as House, Suspiria, Shock, and The Hills Have Eyes, proving horror could be much more than what it was perceived to be by critics and detractors. We were also only 1 year away from one of my all-time favorite remakes, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. There was definitely something in the air in the mid-70s that started to bend the genre in different directions. So a lot of folks think that trauma horror or prestige horror, which I think is a really insulting term, has been invented by A24. And while I love A24, and I am a card-carrying member of the fan club of A24, they didn't invent this genre. It's been around for quite some time, and I really feel that if we want to dig into this genre or horror in general, we do have to go back and look at what came before. And Haunting of Julia is a great example of this kind of work because it could sit comfortably in a double feature with The Babadook. It really is this special little film that got lost to time that really deserves a second look. Based on the excellent Peter Straub novel Julia, adapted for the screen by Harry Bromley Davenport and Dave Humphreys, and beautifully directed by Richard Loncraine, the film is a lost masterpiece. Loncraine's sole credit before this film was Slade in Flame, or plainly Flame, which follows the fictitious history of rock group Flame portrayed by glam rock legend Slade. Richard seems more like a journeyman director, taking whatever project suited his mood at the time. He's consistently made movies and television all the way up to 2017's Finding Your Feet, and has stated that he just loves the process of making films. Julia is certainly an interesting experiment in his bag of tricks because it's a standout amongst his work. This being his second film, and still in his early 20s, Loncraine stated that even he didn't understand what he was going for in the film, and had he been a bit older and more wise, he may have handled it differently. There are scenes where you may see a vase in the background move 3 inches from a previous scene, indicating that the entity has entered the room, and while that appeals to nerds like myself, Loncraine admits now that it may not have been the best choice to make the audience work that hard. Still, Loncraine does an incredible job creating atmosphere with his crew, specifically with meticulous production design by Brian Morris and gorgeous cinematography by Peter Hannon. The production was also fraught with difficulty, including an overbearing producer named Alfred Pariser, who had a completely different idea of how the film should be executed, and even went as far as to splatter blood all over Mia Farrow during a key scene without her knowing. I couldn't imagine the stress a young Loncraine was up against, including a young Mia Farrow who, at the zenith of her career, needed more from a young director's instructions than, just open the door and walk outside. And so Loncraine had to adapt to providing Mia with more motivation and depth. He had to do the same for a particularly hot commodity of the time, Tom Conti, who puts in a stellar performance as Mark Berkeley and is a standout in the film. He and Mia really have some off-the-charts chemistry, and you can tell they took these roles very seriously. Loncraine really deserves so much credit for turning in such a well-crafted film while building his parachute on the way down. He also happens to be one of the kindest directors I have ever heard, and proves that you can be a good human and still make a great film. So like most of the movies that I cover on this channel, this was one that I saw on some rainy afternoon in the house I grew up in on Staten Island on the Sony Trinitron, and it was really a crapshoot at the time of what was on. So you're always guaranteed to have the WWOR Shaolin Warrior movies or some home improvement show on PBS. But if one were to hedge their bets with, say, a Channel 5 or Channel 11, you never really knew what you were going to get. I remember flipping through the channels until I happened upon this eerie brown-tinted movie. I was absolutely transfixed by its somber beauty and was almost hypnotized by it. I stayed with the film to the very end, and the final image of the movie was seared into my brain for the rest of my life. I frantically looked through the Staten Island Advances TV guide to make sure I remembered the title was in fact what I had read on the screen, and sure enough, there it was in black and white, The Haunting of Julia. I would never forget this film, and years would go by with me trying to find anyone who had even heard of it. Truly, I thought this was something that I had just imagined or dreamed, that for some reason it was a film that no one would ever know, and that I alone was privy to its existence. It wasn't until many years later, with the advent of Google, that I finally got my answer that I had in fact seen the film, and it was most widely known as Full Circle. Flash forward to a few years ago when Shudder picked up the film for a short period of time, and I sat with my girlfriend and filmmaking partner Bethany Watson to finally share the magic with someone else. As I sat and watched it with her, we barely spoke a word and remained completely transfixed on the movie. When it was finally over, I quietly shut the television off and asked Bethany what she thought, and I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. We sat and discussed it for quite some time and held each other in silence afterward because the film had that much of an effect on both of us. And truly, that is what great horror does. It stays with you long after the credits roll. After watching this film in preparation to make this video, I realized that I am totally a person who is attracted to a specific kind of sadness, both in film and music. And I don't want to paint myself as some like goth prince of darkness, but there's just something about it that I've always found attractive in both of those mediums. And if you can relate to that, then this movie is absolutely for you. I really cannot state enough the power of Mia Farrow's eyes in her performance. There is a loss within them that is felt so deeply after the inciting incident, which pushes her to the outer edges of grief and permeates every scene. There's a specific moment that has always sat with me, and that's when Julia, after washing her face in the tub, looks at herself in the mirror and breaks down in tears, still fresh in the grieving process of losing her daughter Kate. Mia, who 8 years prior made a tremendous mark in horror with her gripping performance in Rosemary's Baby, seems somewhat made to play the tormented Julia with her doe-like eyes and seemingly otherworldly glow. She embodies a woman so gripped by unimaginable loss that it drives her to a fatal obsession with the unknown. But there is also a toughness about her portrayal of Julia which every female protagonist who's considered a final girl must possess for us to love her. She knows when to leave the controlling and abusive Magnus, portrayed to eerie perfection by Keir Dullea, as well as put herself in dangerous situations to uncover the truth. While her sadness envelops her at every turn, she still comes across as strong and independent, unafraid to face what or who might be following her. And though she seeks comfort and understanding from the men around her, when push comes to shove, Julia will go on without them. She becomes, in essence, a tragic detective of sorts, driven to right the wrongs of the past she cannot let go of, and a grief that even time cannot forgive. Tom Conti also puts in one of the finest performances of the era as Mark Berkeley, Julia's kind friend who wants nothing more than to be there for her, even if it's platonic. He shows up to help, and you can see the underlying tension between the two bubbling up, and the respectful distance he gives her as she takes her time to heal from her past traumas. He is a sweet man who exhibits sensitivity that's rarely shown or even celebrated in male characters, which makes his fate even more heartbreaking. If there's one thing that jumps out at me when I'm talking about this film, it's definitely the atmosphere. And a lot of that has to do with the cinematography and the soundtrack. Shot by Australian-born Peter Hannon, who worked on Loncraine's previous film, Slade in Flame, he helped craft a gorgeous-looking film that definitely inspired the way I shoot my own work. Loncraine insisted that the film be shot with anamorphic lenses, believing that all films should be shot this way, and, might I add, I wholeheartedly agree. So he and Peter went about shooting it with giant cameras that made so much noise they had to cover them with Victorian chairs that were part of the set in order to dampen the sound. The color palette is nearly non-existent, as he focuses on creating an almost sepia tone image to every scene, giving the film the feeling that you're looking more at an aged Victorian painting in a museum rather than a moving image. There's also a haze to the images that make you feel as if you're in a dream, not quite grasping if you are seeing what's in front of you or if it's just your imagination. It is, in its entirety, beautifully drab and extremely well composed. There's a fluidity to the camera work that was rarely seen in horror at this time, dancing subtly through shots. Almost as if we are the ghost, observing our protagonists from a very thin veil. Interiors are filled with shadows and mere hints of light that touch specific features of Julia as she is slowly coming out of the darkness that encompasses her, but always seems to pull her back in. The look of the film is both beautiful and eerie all at once. A stunning piece of visual work that deserves way more attention than it's received over the years. And then there's the incredible soundtrack by Colin Towns, who encapsulates the story beautifully through a chilling soundtrack. It was actually a demo of the main title track, Full Circle, that upon hearing it gave Mia Farrow the confidence to say yes to the role of Julia. A lone piano slowly builds to a synth crescendo in the titular track, Full Circle, as the entire score brings you in and out of Julia's journey. I cannot even describe the feelings I get when listening to it, coupled with the imagery and direction. It is both frightening and touching, making it one of the best modern Gothic scores of its day. The synths feel more like haunted spirits than notes as they hover above the grounded humanity of the grand piano's notes. It feels as if you are floating along with it, and deserves to be listened to on repeat on a chilly late afternoon in October, just as the sun is setting behind orange and red tree-lined hills and the ghosts of autumn return. Alright everyone, this is the portion of the video where I get into spoilers, so if you don't want to hear that, please go watch the movie, seek it out. I guarantee you're going to love it, and then come back to my little corner of the internet for the conclusion of this video. From start to finish, there is an undeniable level of craftsmanship in The Haunting of Julia. There is little in the way of jump scares, yet the images are terrifying. A light bulb turning off signifying the exit of the ghost after an act of vengeance. The stillness of a sudden death. The slow and steady build to an ending that is more than fitting. One we are not ready for, no matter how much we knew in our hearts that it was coming. All of these elements combine to create something that is so subtle, you may not immediately be scared, but you will find yourself thinking about it long after the final, gut-wrenching scene. There's been some debate as to the fate of Julia and at whose hands that fate was brought from. Some say that she was truly haunted by the spirit of a child that reminded her of her own deceased daughter, while others purport that Julia, grief-stricken to the point of no return, was the purveyor of her own demise. I prefer to believe that she was in fact haunted by the spirit of a malevolent child entity, and that Julia's growing obsession with repairing the past through a supernatural connection leads to her demise. An open vessel for the cravings of a hungry ghost. The Haunting of Julia is a film that deserves to be sought out, viewed, debated, and appreciated. It's a movie that asks you to be patient with it as the story slowly unravels. It is at times hard to watch and subsequently hard to let go of. It pulls you into its dreamlike web and never lets you go, standing strong as one of the greatest ghost stories ever committed to film. And like Julia, I have never been able to let go of my obsession with it, the film that will forever haunt me, one that I refused to let go of until I was reunited with it again. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching, and please go seek out this movie. It is a gem. And really, like, one of the things I want to do at this channel is preserve films and preserve horror films and keep them in our minds and in our hearts. These movies are just as important as the ones that are being preserved that are considered high art. I consider this high art, and I think you should give it a shot if you could find it. I had to get my copy on Etsy, believe it or not. So that's it, folks. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment below. And if you have seen it, let me know what you think in the comments. And if you just watched it, let me know what you think in the comments. And you can follow me on all the other stuff too. And I'll leave those links below, right here, as I'm saying it and pointing. Maybe it's up here. I don't know. Maybe it's over there. Or as above. Is it like that? Okay, guys. Until the next time, I'll see you wherever.